I still remember the day we found the tree. It stood at the edge of the woods behind our neighborhood, twisted and ancient, with gnarled branches that reached into the sky like claws. The tree seemed to have been there forever, watching over the forest, its roots buried deep in the ground as if it was holding on to some dark secret. My best friend Jack and I were 10 years old at the time, always looking for adventures in the small, boring town we lived in. There wasn't much to do, so we spent our summers exploring the woods, building forts, and imagining ourselves as brave adventurers. The old tree became our favorite spot, mostly because it was so different from the other trees in the forest. It looked out of place, almost as if it didn't belong. From a distance, the tree looked like any other, but the closer you got, the stranger it became. The bark was rough and dark, covered in deep grooves and scars that formed strange, unreadable symbols. The branches twisted in unnatural shapes, and the leaves were a sickly pale green, unlike any other leaves in the forest. "I bet it's cursed," Jack said the first time we saw it. I laughed, but there was something about the tree that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but I felt a chill whenever we got too close. The air around the tree was always colder, even in the middle of summer, and the birds and animals never went near it. It was as if the tree had its own little patch of silence, where nothing dared to live. Despite my unease, we kept going back. It was like the tree had some kind of pull over us, a strange attraction that we couldn't resist. We built our fort near the base of the tree, using its thick roots as walls. From there, we spent hours pretending to be explorers or knights, defending our territory from imaginary monsters. But as the summer went on, things started to change. It was small at first, just little things that we could explain away. I'd hear a rustling in the branches above, but when I looked up, there was nothing there. Jack swore he saw shadows moving around the tree out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, they were gone. We told ourselves it was just the wind or our imaginations, but deep down, we both knew something wasn't right. Then came the night we decided to camp out near the tree. We had talked about it for weeks, daring each other to spend the night in the woods. Finally, on a warm August evening, we packed our sleeping bags, grabbed some snacks, and headed to the tree. It was supposed to be fun, just another adventure. But as soon as the sun started to set, the air around the tree grew colder, and the woods felt different, darker, more sinister. We set up camp at the base of the tree, using our fort as a shelter. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. Jack lit a small fire, and we sat around it, telling stories to keep our minds off the creeping darkness. "I bet the tree was part of some ancient ritual," Jack said, his face lit by the flickering flames. "Maybe people used to come here to worship it or something. Maybe it's haunted." I shivered, not because of the cold, but because there was something unsettling about the way Jack was talking. He had a strange look in his eyes, like he was almost serious. "Don't be stupid," I said, trying to laugh it off. "It's just a tree." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The tree was more than just a tree. I could feel it. There was something alive about it, something watching us from the shadows. As the night went on, the fire died down, and we crawled into our sleeping bags. Jack fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. The sounds of the forest, the usual chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves, were gone. The silence was so thick, it felt like a weight pressing down on me. I stared up at the twisted branches above, and in the dim moonlight, they looked like hands reaching down, ready to grab me. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But then I heard it, a low creaking sound, like wood bending under pressure. My eyes snapped open, and I sat up, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the tree. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no breeze. The air was still, unnaturally still. I glanced over at Jack, who was still asleep, and then back at the tree. The creaking grew louder, and I saw something move. At first, I thought it was a shadow, But then I realized it was one of the branches. It was bending slowly, as if it was reaching for me. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, my heart racing. The branch kept moving, stretching toward me, its twisted shape almost human-like. I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. Trees didn't move. But there it was, right in front of me, reaching, growing closer. I turned to wake Jack, but he wasn't there. His sleeping bag was empty. "Jack?" I called, my voice shaky. There was no answer. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as I searched the darkness around the tree. Where had he gone? He wouldn't just leave without telling me. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he had gone to use the bathroom or grab more firewood. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it at the tree. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted branches and the rough, scarred bark. And that's when I saw it. There, tangled in the branches, was Jack. His body hung limply, wrapped in the thick, gnarled arms of the tree. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, staring blankly into the night. The branches coiled around him like snakes, pulling him deeper into the tree, into its dark, hollow center. I screamed. Without thinking, I ran toward the tree, grabbing at the branches, trying to pull Jack free. But the branches were too strong, too thick. They tightened around him, pulling him farther and farther into the tree until he disappeared completely, swallowed by the ancient wood. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath, my mind unable to process what had just happened. 1 minute Jack was there, and the next, he was gone. The tree had taken him. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, staring up at the tree, waiting for it to come for me next. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tree stopped moving. The branches returned to their normal positions, and the creaking sound faded away, leaving only silence. For a moment, I sat there, too shocked to move. Then slowly I stood up and backed away from the tree, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know what to do. Jack was gone, taken by the tree, and there was nothing I could do to save him. I ran. I ran through the woods, not caring where I was going, not caring about the branches that scratched my face or the roots that tripped me. All I wanted was to get away from that tree, away from whatever dark, evil thing had taken my friend. By the time I made it back to town, it was morning. The sun had risen, casting a golden light over everything, but I didn't feel any safer. I burst into my house, panting and wild-eyed, trying to explain what had happened to my parents. But they didn't believe me. They thought I was making it up, that Jack had run away or gotten lost. The police searched the woods for days, but they never found Jack. His disappearance became a mystery, one that no one could explain. Eventually, people stopped looking, stopped talking about it. But I knew the truth. The tree had taken him. Years have passed since that night, but I can't forget. I can't shake the feeling that the tree is still out there, waiting, watching. Every time I walk past those woods, I feel its eyes on me, its twisted branches reaching out, ready to take someone else. I've tried to move on, but the memories haunt me. Sometimes I still hear the creaking of wood in the dead of night, and I wonder if the tree is calling for me, waiting for the day when it will come for me too. I know one thing for sure, the old tree is not just a tree, it's something much worse, something ancient and evil. And it's still out there, waiting. There's an old tree at the edge of town, standing tall and alone in the middle of an empty field. It's been there longer than anyone can remember, its massive trunk gnarled and twisted, covered in dark, rough bark that seems to absorb light. The townspeople call it the Whispering Tree, but they never talk about why. When I first heard about it, I thought it was just another local legend, something to scare kids away from wandering too far from home. I wish I had never found out the truth. My name is Mark, and I've lived in this small town all my life. It's the kind of place where nothing much happens and everyone knows each other's business. I work at the local hardware store, live in a small apartment on Main Street, and spend most of my free time reading or watching TV. Life was simple, and that was fine by me. But everything changed the day I went out to the old field. It was a Friday evening when it started. My friend Jake had been talking about the whispering tree all week, egging me on to go check it out with him. He was always into weird stuff, ghost stories, abandoned buildings, creepy legends. I wasn't really into any of that, but Jake had a way of convincing me to go along with his crazy ideas. "Come on, Mark," Jake had said with a grin. "It's just a tree. What's the worst that could happen? We'll check it out, take a few pictures, and be back before dark." I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but after a week of him pestering me, I finally gave in. So, that Friday evening, just before the sun started to set, we hopped in Jake's truck and drove out to the old field. The field was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods and empty farmland. As we approached, I could see the tree standing in the middle of the field, its thick branches reaching out like crooked arms. There was something unsettling about the way it looked, almost like it didn't belong there, like it was part of something much older and darker than the land around it. Jake parked the truck at the edge of the field, and we got out. The air was strangely still, and the sky was starting to turn a deep shade of orange as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. I felt a chill run down my spine as we walked toward the tree, even though it wasn't cold out. "You feel that?" Jake asked, glancing at me. "It's like the air's different here." "Yeah," I muttered, trying to ignore the growing unease in my gut. "Let's just get this over with." We walked across the field in silence, the tall grass swaying gently around us. As we got closer to the tree, I noticed that the grass around it was dead, forming a perfect circle of dry brown earth. The tree's roots snaked out from the base like blackened veins, twisting and curling into the ground. The bark was darker up close, almost black, and its surface was rough, like it had been scarred by something. Jake pulled out his phone and started taking pictures, moving around the tree as he did. I stayed back, keeping my distance. There was something about the tree that made me feel uneasy, like it was watching us. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the branches above us, and that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jake said, not looking up from his phone. "I don't know. It sounded like someone whispering." Jake chuckled. "It's probably just the wind, man. Don't freak yourself out." I tried to brush it off, but the whispering didn't stop. It was so quiet, like it was just out of earshot, but I could hear it. It sounded like voices, dozens of them, all whispering at once, overlapping and blending together. I looked around, but there was no one else in the field, just Jake, the tree, and me. "Jake, I'm serious," I said, taking a step back. "I don't like this. Let's go." But Jake wasn't listening. He had moved closer to the tree, reaching out to touch the bark. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the whispering grew louder, more intense. It wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside my head, echoing in my mind, filling me with a sense of dread so overwhelming I thought I was going to be sick. "Jake, stop!" I shouted, but it was too late. As soon as Jake's hand made contact with the tree, he froze. His body went rigid, and his eyes glazed over. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening now, and I could hear individual words in the jumble of voices. "Help us. Let us out. She won't stop. We're trapped." The voices blended together in a maddening chorus, but I couldn't make sense of what they were saying. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake wasn't moving. His hand was still pressed against the tree, and his face was pale, like all the blood had drained from it. "Jake!" I yelled, running toward him. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. His hand came away from the tree with a sickening crack, like pulling something out of wet mud. He collapsed to the ground, his body limp, and I dropped to my knees beside him. "Jake, come on, wake up." I shook him, but he didn't respond. His eyes were half open, staring blankly up at the darkening sky. For a moment, I thought he was dead, but then I saw his chest rise and fall, shallow, slow breaths. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they were getting louder, more frantic. I could feel them crawling inside my mind, tugging at my thoughts, pulling me toward the tree. I stood up, my legs shaky, and turned to face the tree. Its branches swayed gently, even though there was no wind. The whispering seemed to come from the tree itself, from deep within its ancient bark. I took a step closer, drawn in by the eerie sound, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. But then I saw it. At the base of the tree, near where Jake had touched the bark, something was moving. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else. The bark of the tree was shifting, twisting, like it was alive. Faces, hundreds of them, pressed out from the bark, their features distorted and grotesque, mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The faces were moving, writhing, as if trying to break free from the tree. Their eyes, dark hollow pits, stared at me, pleading, as the whispers grew louder and more desperate. "Help us. Free you us." I couldn't breathe. Panic gripped me, and I turned to Jake, who was still lying motionless on the ground. I had to get him out of there. I grabbed him by the arms and started dragging him back toward the truck, my muscles burning with effort. The whispering followed us, growing fainter as we moved away from the tree, but it was still there, echoing in my mind. I don't know how I managed to get Jake into the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel as I sped away from the field, the old tree disappearing in the rearview mirror. The whispers faded, but they never completely stopped. Even as I drove through the empty streets of the town, I could still hear them, faint and distant, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Jake didn't wake up that night. I took him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't explain what was wrong with him. He was alive, but he wouldn't respond to anything, his eyes wide open, staring blankly, as if his mind was somewhere far away. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces in the tree, heard the whispers. They wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to tell people what had happened, but no one believed me. They said it was stress, or that I was overreacting. But I knew the truth. The tree was alive, cursed, haunted, whatever you want to call it. And it had taken Jake. I went back to the field a few days later. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could find a way to help Jake, or maybe I just needed answers. The field was exactly the same as before, quiet, still, as if nothing had happened. The tree stood in the center, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. But as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a new face in the bark. Jake's face. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his eyes hollow and empty, just like the others. The whispers were louder now, more insistent, and I knew that Jake was gone, trapped inside the tree, just like all the others. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran, but I didn't stop until I was back in my truck, speeding down the road as fast as I could. The whispers followed me, echoing in my mind, and I knew they would never stop. That was weeks ago. Jake's still in the hospital, his body alive but his mind gone. I don't visit him anymore. I can't. Every time I go near him, I hear the whispers again, louder and more desperate. I hear them in my sleep, in the silence of my apartment, in the quiet moments at work. They're always there, just beneath the surface, waiting. I've tried to forget, to move on, but I can't. The tree won't let me. Sometimes I catch myself staring out the window, drawn toward the edge of town, toward the field where the tree waits. It wants me to come back. It wants me to join them. And deep down, I know I will.